Boa tarde a todos e a todas, bem-vindos ao nosso evento de hoje. Meu nome é Lúcio Renó, eu sou professor do Instituto de Ciência Política da Universidade de Brasília, e hoje é um prazer estar aqui com a Mônica Pachón, que foi nossa convidada durante essa semana, através do programa de internacionalização da CAPES, aqui na Universidade de Brasília, ministrando um minicurso sobre a temática da apresentação de hoje, que culmina, não é, a participação da professora Mônica nessa nossa atividade com essa palestra pública, que foi reagendada das 17 para as 18 horas. A gente agradece a compreensão de todos e de todos. E eu vou passar a palavra imediatamente para a professora Mônica. Mônica, acho que a gente pode combinar em torno de 30 a 40 minutos, pode ser, para a sua apresentação, e seguido de uma etapa de perguntas e respostas. Professora Mônica Pachón é professora da Universidade de Los Andes, na Colômbia, em Bogotá, no Departamento de Arquitetura e Design. Ela fez mestrado em Ciência Política na Universidade de Los Andes, depois um mestrado em Estudos Latino-Americanos na Universidade de Oxford e um doutorado em Ciência Política na Universidade da Califórnia, em San Diego. A Mônica estuda política legislativa, relações executivo-legislativo, e tem publicado extensamente na área, e agora e trabalha também, né, com inúmeras atividades inovadoras de transparência, acesso a dados. Congresso Visível é um projeto que ela coordenou durante um bom tempo, e ela ministrou um curso aqui sobre design aplicado, não é, a políticas públicas, pensando nas etapas de formulação, não é isso, Mônica? Você vai falar um pouco mais sobre isso, então eu vou passar a palavra para você, agradecendo mais uma vez. Eu vou marcar o tempo, tá? E eu aviso quando forem 30 minutos, tá, da sua fala, e aí a gente combina um pouquinho mais de tempo, se for necessário. Então, muito obrigado de novo, tá, Mônica, pela sua presença, é um prazer, e eu passo a palavra para você. Eu vou desligar aqui meu microfone e câmera, tá certo? E depois eu retorno. Obrigado, Mônica.
Muito obrigada, Lúcio. Eu vou falar em inglês, porque meu português não é tão bom. Então, thank you, everybody, for being here. My name, as Lucy was saying, is Mónica Pachón. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm going to make my presentation that I'm hoping, Lucio, you can confirm you're seeing my presentation. Yes? Okay, thank you. So my presentation is called Call to Action Design Thinking Meets Social Science. And this is something that I'm very passionate about, the idea of interdisciplinary work. As Lucy was saying, I am a professor at the design department at Universidad de Los Andes. And for 3 years now, I've been trying to make students think about politics and public policy from using the design thinking method. So when you're a social scientist, you can ask yourself, right? If you could do anything to improve others' well-being, what would you do, right? And there are so many problems that we have and that are so difficult to solve. Racism, inequality, poor government performance, access to a quality education, global warming. All these are problems that we care about as social scientists. There has been a lot of efforts recently to discuss about these topics, to understand and diagnose what are the reasons why these problems happen. So the question as a social scientist, sometimes we do to ourselves, is what would you do? And my invitation to you today will be the question of a different question. From the design thinking perspective, the question would be, if you want to improve others' well-being, what can you do? And this is the first principle of design thinking, which is action. We go to the problems and we want problems to get solved. In a way, we understand problems as systemic, and we are not thinking that problems can be solved in a second. But agency comes first, and the agency from the designer's perspective and the social science perspective would be if there's anything you can do to improve. So the theory behind it is, of course, incremental change. This doesn't mean that innovation is only incremental change, but is somewhere that we can start. So what is design thinking? And I'm going to try and explain in a small amount of time what is it that design thinking is, from the perspective of a professor, it would mean that you think about problems. It's problem-based learning. Really, what designers do is to investigate, research, and try to find and come up with opportunities and ideas to solve that challenge or problem. So design thinking is a method in which you start with a challenge or a brief. This brief will be researched on. Anyone who's there, who's studying or doing the challenge, should go back to all stakeholders that are involved, understand if it's a service, what is the customer journey for this service, what is the back end of the service, what is the front end of the service, the data that you can gather from this service or product or just experience or problem, and then create a synthesis of the problem. This synthesis of the problem will allow you to understand and frame opportunities in which this challenge can be, dealt with. Later on, there's this process of ideation, right? So we do research, synthesis, ideation, meaning, okay, so there are some opportunities in this challenge. What can we do? And when we think about what can we do, we are open to new ideas. We want to understand if new technologies are able to solve the problem, if there's any other channels that we have to open to improve a service, or just create an experience for citizens to do what we need them to do. And then we go and prototype, design, and understand what the impact of this prototype is, and you go back and iterate and measure impact. So design thinking is a thinking method, really, a research method that can do many things. But for me, what design thinking offers, and this is in the words of Richard Buchanan, who's one of the biggest promoters of this methodology, I'm going to read it. It lies in a concern to connect and integrate useful knowledge from the arts and sciences alike, but in ways that are suited to the problems and purposes of the present. Designers are exploring concrete integrations of knowledge that will combine theory with practice for new productive purposes. And this is the reason why we turn to design thinking for insight into the new liberal arts of technological future. This, for me, it's very important because as a social scientist, most times I will end up my work in the synthesis. Maybe I will do some policy recommendations, but I will never go through ideation, design, and implementation. And this is something that I think makes a huge difference in the design thinking perspective, and allows us to think about solutions in a decentralized way. And I go back to Hayek to understand, and I think this is very important. Hayek conceives the problem of society not as a problem of resources, limited resources, but a problem of knowledge. And so I quote, he says, the economic problem of society is thus not merely a problem of how to allocate given resources, if given is taken to mean given to a single mind, which deliberately solves the problem set by this data. What he's referring to is, of course, the role of a planner, the role of the state. He's saying we shouldn't be limited to solve public problems, only demanding to the state, but it is rather a problem of how to secure the best use of resources known to any of the members of society for ends whose relative importance only these individuals know. Or to put it briefly, it is a problem of the utilization of knowledge not given to anyone in its totality. I would say, and I would consider design from a theoretical perspective in political science to be libertarian in a way, because what design is proposing is that anyone can be an agent of change. Anyone can find business or opportunity in any of the problems that are posed. I'm going to give an example of what I mean by this. The Danish Design Center is a center in Denmark that works to promote innovation, private and public. So what they did, for example, in a challenge that they had to diminish congestion, what was to push innovation to supply alternative transportation. Trio Bike was the result of that. This was produced by a firm in Denmark, and they could measure the impact of creating this new product for women who had kids and were not able to go on a bike normally as other people did when using these bikes, normal bikes. So the idea here, of course, is that there is opportunity to construct and innovate in new solutions that could be private, but can end up making better, a public good, which is diminishing congestion. So it is not about the public service, really. It is about public service. And this is something that I think we have seen more incrementally as the digital age evolves. One of the examples that I like the most is how lots of firms are starting to worry about the public good and start helping things that are very difficult to happen, like, for example, voter registration for young voters. They design within their own systems a way to help this registration possible. In the US, in the 2020 election, Snapchat was responsible to help more than 1 million users register to vote. And other social platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter were also happy to invest money and resources to actually provide this need and this public service, which is young people do please go vote. So another way to think about this is also how can we use the data that we have and the technology that we have to understand new systems and create new services. If I have the time, I will show you there are two examples in which, for example, in the case of Colombia, we have an enterprise that was working with companies to improve and maximize inventory. And they came up with this solution where all this food waste was donated, and they became the most successful story on redistributing food that would be wasted otherwise. So in a nutshell, I would say interdisciplinary work is amazing and can generate change from products that are very difficult to produce, that designers in Colombia, in my university, found a way to naturally make ice in a warming world. This was in a class, in a challenge, a Biodesign challenge. They created a firm that is called NanoFreeze. They won this award by the Biodesign challenge, and now they are a startup. And with this startup, they're building technologies and products that can help and aid countries in which, for example, taking vaccines to very remote areas is very difficult. This example of biodesign is fairly interesting, and I think it's very useful and cool. But in the case of social sciences, we're dealing with humans, and this is very important in design. Design as design thinking, this defines itself as human-centered design. And this is very important for us to understand, what is going on? How are these humans thinking about these things? How are how do they receive these services? How do they perceive these products? So when thinking about social sciences and design thinking experts, I think, social science has a lot to give. What? Data and expertise. Social scientists know what's going on, and they can start asking themselves, can life of our audiences can be improved? Do voters want to can vote better? Can we get a better experience for them to be more involved in politics? Can we provide better lives for those citizens if we have a public policy? It is not enough to provide the good. We know that we need to do a little further effort for them to get the good, and not a lot of people get informed. So how is it that we're going to provide this information? Which are the channels? For implementers of public policy, we can also ask them, because they're very randomly asked implementers when public policy is being constructed, how can the product and service be improved? This arena of implementation of public policy is not well studied, and what design thinking research is doing is precisely asking these type of questions. Can the service be better provided? Is the problem systemic? We can ask users also, what are your feelings and values towards others? Is there something that you don't like? Is there some reason why you don't want to go to the state to ask for help? And what is the information you've got? And can you understand what the state is offering you, or what the service, or what is it that you're requested to do as a citizen? So what are the challenges? And this is something that I think it's very important. What are the challenges for us to think about design thinking being intertwined with other disciplines? Well, first, we need to think that most problems require interdisciplinary work. Design is not about parts, it's about the whole. We need to understand and stop obsessing with the parts. And this is something that I found myself obsessed with sometimes, because as I studied executive legislative relations, I was very much obsessed with the idea of my indicators and my data, but the so what question remained. I could do, transparency efforts. I could try and put data in the hands of people, but was Congress getting better? Was I able to measure better representation? What were the challenges there? And why was I so obsessed with one indicator when people were not understanding the system, or maybe I wasn't able to understand the whole system? So these was very important for me to. It was a realization that I had, and I'm going to show you examples of how this happened. And also, I needed to stop having assumptions of an exemplary citizen and understand citizens. When I was constructing Congreso Visible and all these efforts of e-democracy that we can see all over the place, assume that citizens are super interested, and they also have assumptions of high levels of sophistication. But when we ask ourselves, simple questions about policy, can we really understand the connection between our political preference and policy preference? And I think this is a question that we need to do to ourselves, but also to do to, citizens, to understand how is it that we're going to choose a language, or what is it that we're going to communicate. So we need to get better at what is important. And this is, of course, a normative argument. And I'm sure people might find it harsh, but I'm going to try and persuade you on this argument. I think the digitalized world has brought attention to design, but design is not about beautiful interfaces and websites. And I think it is important to understand that it is about working services which effectively solve problems. And this is an obsession for a lot of people, solving problems. Why? Because that is what makes the well-being, our well-being, much touches our well-being much more effectively. So the other question is, what is the right channel to get an audience at the audience we're trying to communicate? One of the solutions that I find that are common, and I see them a lot in when I'm teaching, is, oh, okay, let's build an app. And I tell the students, is an app the solution? What about the digital divide? Is this the way that we want to communicate with citizens? What is the backend and what is the service that is going to back up this app? I could provide an app for all citizens to make to make denuncias, right, more effectively. But if denuncias are not being responded to, if the police hasn't improved its service, what I'm going to generate is more apps and same service. So it's again, I think we need to understand the whole system and understand what is it that we can improve of the system. It is also important for us to ask ourselves, what are we demanding from citizens? Because in a way, this idea of building apps and relying on only the digital world as a solution may be not a solution. I have stories when talking to my students. There was this app that the police was constructing precisely to make it easier for citizens to demand attention on criminal charges or on criminality, and they would go to to the police station, and the police guy would sit there and say, "Oh, I don't know why you came here. We don't deal with this here. You have to go to our website and do it." And this difficulties in terms of channels were very disappointing to citizens. They wanted to talk to someone. They wanted to have communication with another human being because something had happened to them. And so sometimes we don't understand what is it that we're demanding from citizens when we create certain services. So I'm criticizing bad design, basically. And also, we have to get better also at information systems, because there is a lot of interoperability problems. And if we are required if we require citizens to go to 10,000 apps, well, we're not making their lives easier. But instead, if we actually reconstruct the system in the back, maybe we can save some time and effectively address the citizens' needs. So there is a lot of opportunities, because now we know how citizens and human beings think, what is their prejudice, how this knowledge is built, how can we predict behavior, what is it that can help citizens make decisions. So all this input that we had that we didn't previously, so together with human-centered design methodologies, can help us build better solutions for citizens. It can go bad. And there I mentioned Cambridge Analytica as one of the examples. We can use all this knowledge to destroy basically a political system, manipulate and get citizens to do things that are not good for them in the short term, but we can also do good. And these technologies should be used for good. What is it that the world is doing? Well, design, human-centered design, is being used in policy making for wicked problems in various countries. This idea of wicked problems is on your left-hand side of the presentation. Is a social or a cultural problem that is difficult or impossible to solve, because normally is complex and interconnected in nature. Wicked problems lack clarity in both their aims and solutions, and are subject to real-world constraints which hinder risk-free attempts to find a solution. I think it's very important for us to understand that policymaking is facing very difficult problems, which do not have one solution. That one solution may generate an unintended consequence. So design allows us to construct a multidisciplinary approach to better understand. And this will help us to improve public policy in the areas we need the most. Also, human-centered design methodologies are being used for last-mile problems. And all social sciences are trying to understand how to persuade people to interact and with the touch points of government, and create the better incentives for people to behave in their own interest. And so we want people to eat less garbage food because we want a more healthy, population. We want them to vaccinate. We want them to get informed. We want people to go to the doctor. We want people to change their habits if they're drinking too much, if they're driving too fast. And these are problems that are last mile problems, because the goods are provided, right? We have infrastructure, we have traffic lights, we have cars that are secure, but there are ample limitations to these usual instruments government use. I could say it's prohibited to drive at more than 50, but can I really stop people from doing that and getting other people from getting hurt? There is a limitation to that. So while the spirit of the policymaking process may be in the right direction sometimes, it is very difficult to find, in these cases, user-friendly solutions. And if we fail to construct real solutions, or if we use sanctions too much, the government may look stupid, and the perception of the public good will be hindered. So examples of what can be good. I'm going to give you some examples of organizations that are doing, I think, a good job at including this information to better understand citizens and create better policy. The Behavioral Insights team in England, they're experimenting all the time, they're prototyping, they're looking for solutions at the local levels and national level to see whether they can deal with prejudice, deal with intermobility, deal, with women empowerment. The IDB and their behavioral team is also doing a lot of work in terms of understanding what are the consequences of certain interventions, using the nudges unit and doing experiments to see if they can improve the quality of public policy in various countries in Latin America. UNDP is also creating acceleration labs all over, the developing world. Of course, it is difficult to enter, design thinking perspectives to the government because we have a rigid system. It's not easy to start innovating and creating prototypes all over the place. And so these organizations ease up this, or make a little bit more flexible these issues. They help invest money in certain prototypes, and then if these prototypes work, they can escalate and provide a very good input for better policy. And one of the examples that I discussed briefly in the course was ballot design. And this was my first time, the first time that I actually did something that was related to design thinking methodologies. There was in 2003, Colombia had a very well-known electoral reform. We had the most personalized proportional system in the world, where the parties could introduce as much lists as they wanted in every district. So there were no limits on the number of lists per party. So when the 2003 reform was approved, everybody was really happy. Finally, we had only one list per party, and that meant that we could nationalize our party system and go from 72 parties to 10 or 12 in time, right? So the reform was highly celebrated. It reorganized the political system and imposed a single list. And this idea was perfect. And we, all political scientists, were celebrating. But as the elections came about, we went from having, we saw this unintended consequence, that we went from having a no vote from 2 to 4%, from having 9 to 15% of no votes. So one in every 5 votes were wasted. And when I became director or program lead of Congreso Visible, this really surprised me. And when I asked my colleagues, they would say, it's protest vote. And I would say, how come? How come 1 in every 5 are protesting? They could win elections, right? They're the 20% of the electorate. So when I started looking into the design, I discovered that usability matters a lot, and we were able to look and do electoral, scrutiny of how people were voting before, and we discovered that that 85% of the people who were wasting their votes were not wasting their vote because they really wanted to waste their vote, but because they didn't understand the instructions. So we went with the Registraduría and the design department. At the time, I was not part of it, but later, now I am. We redesigned the ballot. And so if you see the ballot on the left-hand side, you had to mark twice to actually get the vote right. First, you had to vote for the party, and then you had to name, put the number list below. What people would do was to only mark the list and not mark the party. So it was impossible for the electoral authorities to actually know how people were voting. Later on, we redesigned the ballot to have a specific area for each party. So the voter could actually only vote for the list, but there were as many lists as parties, and it was easier to find. It was easier to read. So they could only mark once, and the vote could be read by the electoral authorities. The ballot performance of the 2011, so we decided to implement with the National Register's Office. We did a lot of prototypes and tests. And what you can see is that the 2007 ballot, that is the one on the top, had a very high new vote, and it was dependent also on proportion on urban, which in the paper in the prototypes we show that it's about education and age. The less educated and the older you are, the higher the probability of wasting your vote. Compared to the 2011 ballot, which was a ballot that really performed well across the whole country. This paper that I wrote with Royce Carroll and Hernando Barragan was, for me, the most important paper I wrote, because it made a difference in the world, and we saved 1 million wasted votes. And the ballot performed so well that people actually were able to vote in blank and have and we had a real measure of what a protest vote was. So if you see proportion of urban, as the more urban the territory is, the more white vote we have. So from having a 15 to 20% new vote, we ended up with a 4% total new vote. And this was so difficult to publish because the theory was usability, but was so important for me as I understood that my research could have an impact on the real world. So finally, I'm going to discuss a little bit of what political science has discovered, the main insights of this political science literature on one issue that is very important now, and how do we get people to vote. And there are a number of authors that I think are very important that discuss this with experimental data and very interesting research and empirical tests on are people interested in politics? How do people get informed? Which are the most effective messages in campaigning? What are the sources people trust to learn politics? How do people make political decisions, and why do people engage in collective action? These are all questions that are very relevant when you think about designers trying to make a difference in elections. this is an example of something that happens after, there is this whole amount of literature that discusses how canvassing is the most effective way to persuade voters. So the Commons, this social change library that is available to all, creates all these tools for canvassing and door knocking, and they produce these blueprints for any activists to actually create a service and create volunteering exercises that are meaningful and that can change people's minds, help them change people's minds and effectively, be activists on certain topics. There are also campaigns that are full of these insights that I think are very useful and understand and useful to generate engagement. This is one of them. Please let me know if the sound is okay.
On November 4th. Now make sure you go out and vote.
The best looking, most loved people in the world have spent years begging our youth to vote.
You have an obligation.
But election after election,
We will.
they simply don't.
All it takes is all of us.
So how do we change that?
For our children,
Well, what if we stop telling them to vote?
for our community.
Instead, we tell them
Vote.
not to vote.
Dude, that's what it means to be an
And instead of the we being celebrities that inspire them, it's a group of strangers that infuriate them.
Dear young people,
Don't vote.
Don't vote.
Everything's fine the way it is.
Tax cuts for the rich? Hell yeah, I'm rich as fuck.
climate change, that's a you problem. I'll be dead soon. Sure, school shootings are sad, but I haven't been in a school for 50 years. I can't keep track of which lives matter.
Sure you don't like it. So, you'll like some meme on Instagram.
If the weather is nice, maybe you could go to one of those little marches. You might even share this video on Facebook.
But you won't vote.
You young people never do.
But I do. I do.
I do. Midterms, primaries.
Every single election. We'll be there, but you won't. Because we're a generation of doers.
Not whiners.
And we're doing great.
And the results.
So this campaign was very, very successful and was using a lot of insights on negative psychology, basically, and political behavior, and aiming at a specific audience, And these are examples that I think are. Give me 1 second. Okay. There you go. Another example of a very interesting political strategy is Alexandria OcasioCortez, and I'm going to present to you a video briefly on her way to get at these voters, and maybe we can learn something from her.
Walking into the halls of Congress wearing red lipstick, it says, I'm a woman and I'm in politics. I am who I am, and I'm inspiring other women to do the same. Today I will be trying Alexandria OcasioCortez's beauty routine. So Alexandria first posted this routine on her Instagram story.
She says that if you wear makeup, especially foundation, you should double cleanse.
We should cleanse with a balm or oil to melt off the makeup.
And then use a soapy cleanser to wash your skin. Also, sometimes I just use a nice face wipe before bed, but get it off your face. We've all slept in makeup.
I first got involved in Alexandria's campaign. I went to a summit on Latinos in New York City, and they needed a lot of help in the primaries.
My mom actually.
So for me, this video shows how to engage teens in something that may not be exactly makeup. Maybe makeup is just, an excuse to talk about something that is really important. But maybe these kids that only are interested in growing up and doing this, makeup videos may be interested in politics after all, after watching Alexandria OcasioCortez. So
And they have a right to kind of go for the change that they want to see.
In the end, I think this is interesting and provocative, as we don't understand really sometimes how to address these new voters and this generation. And we can learn from that and say, Liz, I told you so, and more, let's do more. So thank you so much. I'm sorry I stepped on some minutes. Lucio, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Mônica, tá me ouvindo? Tudo bem? Mônica, consegue me ouvir?
Yes.
Ok. É importante você dizer yes, porque eu não tenho como saber se você está ou não. Muito obrigado pela sua palestra, foi muito interessante. Nós não temos perguntas ainda do público, então eu vou colocar algumas perguntas, tá, Mônica? Para você reagir, e depois a gente vê se tem algo ou não, e aí a gente encaminha para finalizar a sua palestra de hoje, tá? O nosso evento de hoje, melhor dizendo. A sua fala, ela remete muito à ideia de como criatividade e inovação, eu acho que até mais criatividade do que inovação, ideias, né, criativas, entram dentro do Estado, né? Tanto que você começa a sua fala com exemplos da iniciativa privada, e depois o grande desafio é como isso é incorporado pelo Estado, não é? E aí isso toca em elementos como as estruturas de governança do Estado, os seus próprios processos decisórios, e os exemplos que você traz, na verdade, são exemplos mais pontuais, vamos dizer assim, né, de algumas intervenções criativas para a solução de problemas graves, né? Eu acho que o exemplo do desenho da urna é muito interessante, né? E nós vivenciamos algo parecido no Brasil quando da adoção da urna eletrônica, porque ela reduziu enormemente a quantidade de erros que existiam e que anulavam os votos, né? Então as pessoas, o voto nulo, principalmente, diminuiu significativamente depois da introdução de uma inovação tecnológica tão importante quanto a urna eletrônica, né? Então tem um paralelo com esse exemplo, apesar do seu ser até bem mais simples, né? Porque uma reorganização da urna já faz toda uma grande diferença. Eu achava interessante. Mas eu queria que você falasse, se você puder, de algumas das dificuldades, por exemplo, da adoção da inovação, né? Ou de ser criativo no âmbito do Estado. Nós temos experiências interessantes, né? Como esses laboratórios de inovação que têm surgido no mundo todo. Nós temos concursos, a ENAP aqui no Brasil propõe concursos, né, de avaliação de ideias inovadoras nos estados, seja no governo federal, tanto quanto estadual e municipal. Era assim, pelo menos, não sei se continuou. Mas tem um desafio para isso, a meu ver, né, que é, principalmente na América Latina, ou melhor, vamos dizer, países em desenvolvimento ou países ainda com graves problemas de desigualdade e pobreza, por exemplo, né? Por quê? Porque uma essência desse processo todo é informacional. A maior parte das inovações que nós vemos, né, no âmbito do Estado são de acesso à informação, de alguma maneira, né? O cidadão ter mais informação, o Estado usar mais informação proveniente da rua, né, da cidadania. E para isso você precisa de desenvolvimento tecnológico. Então a pergunta que eu queria te pôr é como é que são esses desafios, não é, que existem em países com wicked problems de verdade, né? Porque não tem problema mais wicked do que desigualdade ou pobreza, né? Porque são de muito difícil solução. como é que se resolve esses impedimentos que a baixa capacidade estatal, por exemplo, impõe, não é, para a adoção da inovação, baixos recursos financeiros mesmos do Estado para fazer isso, que são problemas óbvios, né, na América Latina e na África, e certamente, possivelmente em alguns países da Ásia também. Você tem casos, por exemplo, de sucesso, talvez da América Latina, que você pudesse mencionar, da adoção de soluções criativas para esses problemas profundos? E aí, óbvio, uma ideia que vem à cabeça são essa ideia de cidades inteligentes ou cidades criativas, né, que usam a informação de alguma maneira mais consistente para aprimoramento da qualidade do serviço público. Vejo isso como um caminho, mas a adoção mesmo disso na prática, até mesmo aqui no Distrito Federal, onde isso já foi discutido muito, e é uma unidade da federação rica, é difícil, né? Então, talvez se você pudesse problematizar aí os impedimentos para a adoção da inovação nesses países com baixa capacidade estatal, ou limitada capacidade estatal e problemas fiscais graves, né, que limitam a atuação do Estado, seria muito interessante. Obrigado.
Thank you, Lucio. First, I would like to say that the challenge has to be small, right? Here, we're not talking about structural solutions to structural problems because design thinking is less interested in these. It's more interested in small briefs that are actionable, right? So you need to start somewhere, Lucio. It can have a small impact, or it can have a large one. As I showed you, changing a formulario, just changing this design of the ballot, which is the same price for each one of them, has an effect of 1,000 less wasted votes. So it's not so much about the resources, it's about trying to think of what you can do, right? In a way, the invitation is not to consider this as something that is super expensive, but it's something that requires a little bit more flexibility. What do I think can happen? I think, for example, the behavioral unit of IDB has a lot of policies that they have been, they lend money to these countries. So what they do is to actually think, okay, I'm going to lend you money, for women to have grants to go to the university, but let's build, a little bit of a theory, and let's create a service that can help these girls follow up and get the application done, because most people do not know about this, right? And so what they do is to, send text messages, which are not that expensive, send emails that are not very expensive. They just change the service in order for them to be more empowered and have a bigger follow-up to actually get the grant done, right? And the results of these interventions are really good. Why? Because they end up resulting in more women applying to the university. This is an intervention they did in Peru. In Colombia, what they did with the national taxing agency, right? The tax agency in Colombia was like, okay, so we are seeing that a lot of people are not paying taxes. So we're going to change the way we talk to the people who we know are not paying taxes. And so Carlos Escartacini and his colleagues did this paper on that the message is important. And they did it in Argentina and Colombia, and they showed that the more personalized message you have, the more likely people are going to pay their taxes, and they actually did. So experiments as large as the electric bills, changing the design of electric bills as a nudge to put a happy face and compare yourself to neighbors, not that effective, not that costly, but then the amount of energy you save is huge. Two, collecting more taxes is an interesting thing, because then the cost effectiveness of these interventions is huge, right? And so all this literature on on organ donors, just saving for the future, being more healthy, it's not about so much about spending more money, but redesigning the service. Is it difficult? Yes, because structurally the government is not built like that, right? It's not built to ask users and implementers, how can this service be better? Citizens are more like, this is the service and you deal with it, and you have to fill out all this paperwork, and you deal with it. But if we are able to change that mindset in certain services, we can do incremental change. So my take on your question is, yes, of course it's difficult, but you start by doing something. These labs in different agencies in the government, both locally and nationally, can make a difference if they can prototype and show and convince their missionary members, the heads of those organizations, that these change is worth looking into.
Excelente, Mônica. Muito obrigado. E nós não temos mais perguntas. Eu queria agradecer enormemente a sua presença aqui conosco. O seu curso foi um sucesso, foi um prazer. Eu acho que foi uma oportunidade muito boa para os nossos estudantes, né, e para o público em geral. Nós tivemos participantes de fora da universidade. Então, fica nosso agradecimento também ao programa PRINT, né, da CAPES, de internacionalização das universidades brasileiras, que permitiu, não é, a sua vinda, financiar a sua vinda e a sua participação. E a sua dedicação exclusiva, não é, a nós, por esse período, não é, porque senão a gente acaba não fazendo, mesmo sendo de maneira remota. Então é importante que tenha sido dessa forma. E a sua palestra está aqui, eu acho que resume muito bem essa experiência da semana que vocês tiveram. E eu achei ela muito instrutiva, não é? E muito inspiradora também para atuarmos de forma mais criativa na gestão pública, de maneira geral. Então, acho que foi um grande sucesso, e muito obrigado, tá? Pela sua dedicação e pelo seu tempo, tá, Mônica? Combinamos fazer isso mais vezes.
Thank you, and I'm very happy that I was able to share this new experience and this new research agenda with the students and with you. And I do hope that we have chances to work together and to call up the design department and others to help and give our little part to solve problems.
É muito bem-vindo, sim, Mônica. Muito obrigado. Então, vamos encerrar a nossa atividade hoje, agradecendo, não é, o interesse, né, das pessoas que participaram dos nossos eventos nessa semana, e nós manteremos, não é, informados sobre outras atividades que venham a ser desenvolvidas no âmbito do nosso programa de internacionalização. Muito obrigado e desejo uma boa noite para todas e para todos. Até a próxima.